I found tampons in my husband's car. I wished he had been unfaithful to me instead, so that my kids wouldn't have had to go through this. I am a 29-year-old female who has been with my 30-year-old husband for 7 years, married for 4. I've never had reason to suspect he was unfaithful to me or even remotely dissatisfied with our marriage. He likes to joke that we're still living the honeymoon phase, nearly 5 years, and 2 kids in. I wouldn't have questioned that, or him, were it not for a surprise I found in his car last month. When buckling our daughter into her car seat, I noticed something slotted between the cushions. At first, I thought it was just some stray toy or snack wrapper, so I reached down to fish it out. As my fingers closed around the object, I felt the familiar cylindrical shape of a tampon. Confusion washed over me as I pulled it into view, the bright wrapper stark against the upholstery. This wouldn't have been so unusual had I not had an IUD that has stopped my period for the past year, and I didn't even recognize the wrapper style. It was a brand I'd never used, a small but glaring discrepancy that made my stomach churn. I brought it to my husband's attention later that evening, still holding the offending item like it was evidence in a mystery I was desperate to solve. He didn't seem to understand what it was at first, staring at the tampon in my hand with genuine confusion. "Why are you showing me this?" he asked, his brow furrowing. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. "I found it in your car, between the cushions, and it's not mine. I haven't had a period in over a year, remember?" His face remained blank for a moment longer before realization dawned. He shrugged and said it probably belonged to his co-worker, Fiona. His initial confusion quickly gave way to dismissiveness as he waved off my concerns with a nonchalant explanation. "Probably Fiona's," he said with a shrug, turning back to his phone. "She must have dropped it when we went out for lunch the other day." I stared at him, waiting for a sign that he understood why this was bothering me. But there was nothing. No apology, no concern. Just a casual dismissal. It was as if the tampon was no big deal, and I was overreacting. His indifference felt like a slap in the face, leaving me reeling and questioning everything I thought I knew about our marriage. It's not uncommon for my husband to carpool to lunch with his co-workers, and we're both fairly close to Fiona and her husband. The thought of my husband carpooling with Fiona and her husband had always been a non-issue. They were friends after all, and it wasn't uncommon for them to share rides to lunch. In fact, we often socialized as couples, spending weekends at each other's houses for barbecues or movie nights. Fiona and I had even bonded over shared experiences, like the challenges of balancing work and family life. Our kids played together while we chatted about everything from the latest office gossip to more personal topics. It made sense, considering how often they carpooled. I reassured myself that the tampon could have easily slipped out of Fiona's purse during one of these outings, no big deal. Maybe it fell out when she was grabbing her phone or wallet, getting jostled around in the process. No big deal, right? It was just one of those little accidents that could happen to anyone. I brushed it off as a harmless mistake, convincing myself there was no need to worry. After all, our friendship with Fiona and her husband was solid, built on years of trust and shared experiences. There was no reason to suspect anything out of the ordinary. So, I pushed the unsettling discovery to the back of my mind, determined not to let a small, easily explained incident cause unnecessary drama. I put it out of my mind until we had dinner with Fiona and her husband a couple weeks later. I had sincerely wanted to believe my husband. I just couldn't get over the way it had been tucked in the seat and how my husband had seemed not to have any regard for it whatsoever. Maybe playing dumb. I don't know. I did something that I now feel kind of crazy for doing. I faked an emergency, and asked Fiona if she had any tampons while we were out together. She handed me one almost identical to the tampon I'd found in our back seat, and I breathed a sigh of relief. So the tampon there was probably the same tampon here, and in all likelihood, there was an innocent explanation as to why it had been left in the back seat in the first place. I thought I'd seen the last of the out-of-place feminine hygiene products until I found another tampon this morning. This time in my sock drawer. I feel physically ill at the thought of my husband having an affair and even more nauseated at the thought that the woman might have left these tampons out for me to find. If it was my husband's co-worker, why would she give herself away by offering me one the other night? In any other situation I would want to talk to my husband about this, but I feel too sick and embarrassed to approach him with what I found. Contemplating every possible source of 2 tampons has been my personal hell for the past few weeks, but I wanted to share an update. Shortly after posting here, I told my sister what happened. The tampon in the back seat and the sock drawer, my husband's cluelessness, the tampon from Fiona, and all the things I suspected but didn't want to believe. We compared tampons, save for the back seat one I had already discarded, and they were a match, just in different absorbents. I hadn't left either in a place where my husband or daughters would have found them and moved them around. My daughters didn't know what they were or where they had come from. My sister was convinced it was Fiona either pucking my husband, pucking with me, or both. Direct confrontation of either party still seemed like a bad idea, so she suggested inviting Fiona and her husband over for our Labor Day barbecue. Unfortunately, they already had plans. My sister and I agreed that it was too soon for cameras without any other evidence, so it was just a waiting game from there. Watching my husband for any changed behavior, there was none. Our house for any misplaced foreign items, there were none, and even the girls for any new friends they might have met. My sister's husband was adamant on this last point, and partly why he was inclined to believe that the tampons were harmless. If anything had been happening in or around our home, he said, it would be nearly impossible to keep it from me and the girls, since my husband was the one taking them to and from daycare and most other activities during the week. I felt a good bit of consolation in that. It wasn't until my younger daughter, 2yo, came down with something last week that I felt any differently. I wanted to be the one home taking care of her, but my husband insisted that I stay at work while he stayed home with her. I was okay with that. My sister and her husband figured it was a good sign that he would take the time off at a moment's notice, and at that point, we were all already beginning to put the tampon fiasco behind us. By the third or fourth day, I was just happy to see a near healthy child and a husband who was helping see her through it. Toward the end of that week though, I came home to something strange. The toddler that I'd left that morning in an old PJ set was now dressed in a onesie I'd never seen before, with a tiny clip in her hair. I can't say I have the sharpest memory, but I have a pretty good sense of what my kids wear on a day-to-day basis, and particularly what kinds of clothes they wear. I'd sworn off the full-length sleepsuits with snaps across the front long before we'd ever had our second. The long snaps are just a pain in the ass and a no-go for efficient diaper changes, IMO. It's just not something I would dress her in, and my husband knows as much. He doesn't plan for, or buy the girls' clothes, and he certainly doesn't accessorize them, so I was bewildered. And kind of floored at the thought of someone around our sick child without my knowledge. I didn't think twice, and I went straight to my husband to ask if anyone had been over to see him or the girls. He seemed confused, like before, and asked me why I would think that. It had just been him and the kids all day. I asked him again, if someone had so much as stopped by to say hello, and he denied it. He told me to calm down. I might have lashed out and come forward with the accusations right then and there, but our older daughter was in the room and she sensed something was up. In a calmer voice, I asked him a third time if anyone had been around our children, and my husband swore that the girls hadn't been around anyone but him. He also denied buying new clothes or doing anyone's hair. With our daughter in the room and my emotions all over the place, I decided to leave it. I couldn't make sense of it then, and it hardly seems clearer now, after I've driven myself half crazy with explanations that aren't adding up. After nearly losing my mind over a hair clip and a onesie, I realized I wasn't getting anywhere with the accusations and half-baked guesswork. I'd gotten so absorbed in the paranoia and misery of my situation that I wasn't sleeping, eating or caring for my kids the way I should have been. And I wasn't getting any answers. So, I decided to pull the trigger on the hidden cameras and have them shipped to my sister's house, with my brother-in-law agreeing to help with the install setup over at mine. Before the cameras were ever delivered though, I got my long-awaited confirmation, last week. The day began like any other weekday morning in our bustling household. My husband and I rushed around, trying to corral our two energetic daughters into their school uniforms, all while attempting to grab a quick bite to eat ourselves. Despite the chaos, there was a sense of camaraderie in the air, as if we were all in this hectic dance together. Once the girls were dropped off at school, my husband and I went about our respective workdays, counting down the hours until we could reunite with our little ones. But there was a strange feeling that I couldn't shake off, no matter how hard I tried, and it only intensified when I received a notification on my phone while at work. A ring notification. Motion at the front door. I clicked on the video clip, half expecting to see the usual delivery person or neighbor passing by. But what I saw left me stunned. There on my doorstep was a young woman leading my daughter into the house, hand in hand, with my husband and other daughter close behind them. My heart hammered in my chest as I watched, my mind struggling to comprehend what I was seeing. The girls were supposed to be in daycare, and my husband was at work. The woman, as far as I knew, was living 2 states away with a court order keeping her there. Yet here she was, in our home, with my husband and children. A wave of panic washed over me as I scrambled to make sense of the situation. Was this some kind of mistake? A misunderstanding? Or was there something more sinister at play? I felt a knot form in the pit of my stomach as I realized that the answers to my questions might be far more troubling than I ever could have imagined. I stared at the screen in disbelief, the blood pounding in my ears as I watched the unthinkable unfold before my eyes. There, on the footage captured by our Ring doorbell, was a scene straight out of a nightmare. A woman I hadn't seen in years, leading my youngest daughter into our home hand in hand, with my husband and older daughter trailing behind them. The shock of the moment rendered me momentarily speechless. How could this be happening? The girls were supposed to be at daycare, and my husband at work. Yet here they were, entering our house with a woman I never thought I'd see again. My sister-in-law. My initial reaction was one of sheer disbelief, a desperate hope that there must be some kind of mistake, some innocent explanation for what I was witnessing. But as the reality of the situation sank in, a wave of anger surged through me like a tidal wave, threatening to consume everything in its path. With trembling fingers, I reached for my phone, my heart pounding in my chest as I dialed my husband's number. I needed answers, and I needed them now. But as the phone rang on the other end, there was no response. I immediately called my husband to ask him what the puck this woman was doing in our house. He didn't answer, so I texted it to him. Even in his stupidity, he probably realized he had messed up by going through the front door, knew I had gotten the ring notification, and wanted to delay the inevitable. By the fifth or sixth subsequent call though, he did pick up. The woman on the camera was my husband's sister. As I would come to find out later, she was the likely source of both tampons, the onesie, and the bow. She is also registered as an individual with a history of abuse, and a recovering addict, who spent the better part of her adolescence and young adulthood coercing the silence of another one of my husband's family members after she had abused them. I hadn't seen or heard from her in years, and from the way my husband talked about her, I didn't expect I ever would. But here she was, in our house, with our children. It wasn't just the shock of seeing her after years of silence that left me reeling. It was the realization of what her presence in our home meant. My sister-in-law, fresh off another stint in rehab, was the last person I expected to find sneaking into our lives, especially under such clandestine circumstances. The gravity of the situation hit me like a ton of bricks. This wasn't about a random tampon or a harmless mistake. It was about deception and betrayal at the deepest level. Suffice to say I was livid. It wasn't an affair at all and still, somehow, infinitely more disgusting knowing who it was and why all of this had been happening. Apparently, my sister-in-law had wanted to reconnect and make amends with people she'd hurt. And my husband was high on that list. The irony of her attempts at reconciliation through deceit and intrusion was not lost on me. My husband didn't want me to know or, worse, try to keep her family, our children, away from her, so they'd been meeting in secret, often at our house when I was at work. They would enter through the garage, in my husband's car, so the ring camera at the front door wouldn't tip me off. The level of planning and secrecy involved made my skin crawl. She spent the night on a weekend I had been on a business trip and slept in our bed. The very thought of her in our home, in our bed, made me feel violated. She babysat our girls on a night my husband told me he had dropped them off at his parents'. The casual way he had lied to me, the ease with which he had kept this secret, made me question everything I thought I knew about him. She bought the girls clothes and dressed my youngest in the onesie and bow that my husband had promised in his life I had dressed her in myself. The image of my daughter in that unfamiliar outfit, a tiny clip in her hair, now felt like a haunting reminder of the betrayal that had been unfolding right under my nose. And yet, when I turned to my husband for reassurance, for a glimmer of hope in the face of uncertainty, all I found was disbelief and denial. He brushed off my concerns with a casual shrug, insisting that it was all in my head, that I was overreacting to a series of harmless coincidences. My husband swore this was all in my head. The tampons, the onesie, the bow, and all the rest. He was perfectly content to watch me agonize for weeks over a woman he insisted didn't exist. Shrugging off each progressively more unsettling discovery like it was news to him and telling me I was being irrational. He insinuated that I was experiencing postpartum depression, 2 years after I'd given birth. 4 years later I told him that one of my biggest fears for motherhood was to suffer from PPD like my mother had with me, to not be fully present for our babies and be left with a world of guilt and regret as they grew older. But as the weeks stretched into months, and the truth remained stubbornly elusive, my patience wore thin, replaced by a simmering rage that threatened to consume me whole. How could he dismiss my fears so callously, to gaslight me into doubting my own sanity? How could he stand idly by as our family teetered on the brink of collapse? He told me I wasn't sleeping enough, that I missed the girls too much, that I needed to take a step back and reevaluate the state of my mental health. I gave him the benefit of the doubt because he was my husband, and because no other version of events made sense. Now, after a month of this mindfuck, I have nothing to show for my trust but this pathetic situation. And a lot of anger. My husband failed to explain himself. When confronted, he stammered and stumbled over his words, offering half-hearted excuses that made no sense. He muttered something about trying to protect me from unnecessary stress, about his sister just wanting to make amends, but his words were disjointed and unconvincing. Each excuse was more implausible than the last, a desperate attempt to cover up the truth. His evasiveness only confirmed my worst fears. The man I had trusted and built a life with was now a stranger to me, hiding behind a facade of lies and deceit. I watched as he avoided eye contact, his shoulders slumped in defeat. The weight of his betrayal hung heavily in the air, a palpable presence that neither of us could ignore. There was no reasonable explanation for his actions or for the deceit that had tainted our marriage. Every time he opened his mouth, I could see the panic in his eyes, the realization that he had been caught and there was no way out. His silence on certain points spoke louder than any words ever could, revealing the depth of his dishonesty. I knew then that I couldn't stay with someone who had so blatantly betrayed my trust and jeopardized the safety of our children. The thought of my daughters being exposed to such toxic secrecy and manipulation was unbearable. I had to prioritize their well-being, and that meant making the hardest decision of my life. With a heavy heart, I told him it was over. The look of shock and desperation on his face was almost pitiable, but it couldn't erase the damage that had been done. I walked away, determined to protect my children from any further harm. I decided to end the relationship and file for divorce. The decision was both heartbreaking and empowering. It was devastating to acknowledge that our 7-year journey together had come to such a bitter end, but it was also liberating to take control of my life and prioritize my well-being, and that of my children. The divorce process was long and grueling. Each step felt like a new battle in an endless war. There were countless court sessions, each more draining than the last, where I had to relive the pain and betrayal over and over again. My husband fought me every step of the way, refusing to accept responsibility for his actions and attempting to paint himself as the victim. His determination to contest every detail made the process even more exhausting and emotionally taxing. In court, I detailed the discovery of the tampons, the hidden meetings with my sister-in-law, and the lies my husband had told to cover his tracks. I showed the ring footage, which captured her entering our home with my children, and provided testimonies from my sister and brother-in-law to corroborate my claims. However, the court needed more than assumptions about my sister-in-law's character. They required concrete evidence of her past and present behavior, which was not easy to obtain. Despite these challenges, I remained focused on the bigger picture. I emphasized my husband's deceit and the breach of trust, which were undeniable. The court recognized the complexity of the situation and the emotional turmoil it had caused. After months of legal battles and countless court sessions, the court ruled in my favor. I was granted primary custody of our daughters, with my husband receiving supervised visitation rights. The judge acknowledged the need for a stable environment for the children, considering the deceit and the potential risks involved. Looking back, this ordeal taught me several valuable lessons that I hope others can learn from. Trust is the foundation of any relationship, and once it's broken, it's incredibly difficult to rebuild. Always listen to your instincts. If something feels off, it probably is. Communication is key. Address issues head-on rather than letting them fester. Most importantly, never settle for less than you deserve. My children and I deserve a life free from deception and betrayal, and I am committed to building that future for us. In your opinion, what do you think about this story? Please leave your comment below to let me know. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you.
Parents kicked me out because of my sister's pregnancy. Now, they're reaching out a year later to mend things, but I've moved on. My parents kicked me, 19F, out of my house almost a year ago, just a few weeks after turning 18. That wasn't even the worst part. It happened during finals week in high school, and I had nowhere to go. Fortunately, I have good friends since my best friend and her parents took me in, and I am quite grateful to them. My parents kicked me out because my older sister became pregnant, and they thought she needed to move back home so she could be well cared for. She is not even my whole biological sister. She is a half-sister. My mother had been dating my stepfather, Jacob, while they were in college, and she became pregnant a few months before graduation. However, she was too young at the time and chose not to marry him. It was only a fling, and they split up. Jacob, on the other hand, remained determined to be a father, so they co-parented Sasha, my half-sister, and maintained contact. When Sasha was 3, my mother met my biological father. They dated for 2 years before marrying. 1 year into their marriage, she became pregnant with me. However, my father was not prepared and wanted to end the pregnancy. My mother refused, and they separated ways. After my father abandoned my pregnant mother, she severed all relations with him and his family before reconciling with Jacob. My father had passed away by the time I was born, and my mother and Jacob reared me. They married a few years after her divorce from my father was finalized, but I never regarded Jacob as a family member because he never treated me as such. I guess Jacob reunited with my mother while she was pregnant with me because he still loved her and wanted to be on her good side. But to him, I was always a burden. He'd been frigid to me since I was a child, and Sasha treated me similarly. While I got along well with my mother, I never developed a bond with Jacob or Sasha, despite the fact that we lived as a family. They always treated me as an outsider. My mother has always claimed to love me as much as they do, but I've never felt that way. She never acknowledged our estrangement, and despite my attempts to connect with them when I was younger, I was always rejected. As I grew older, I saw what was going on and gave up on pursuing a relationship with Jacob and Sasha. I shouldn't have been surprised when they kicked me out because Sasha was expecting and wanted to move back in. However, it came as a shock. I should have known that Sasha would always be Jacob's priority, no matter how much older she was than me. Still, I hoped my mother would defend me, but she didn't. Sasha approached me around a year ago, just 2 days before finals week, and informed me that she was pregnant. She was 24 at the time, which made her 6 years older than me. Despite this, my parents decided to kick me out to create a place for her and help her save money. Sasha and her boyfriend, who had been together since high school, lived in a little apartment not far from our house. I thought it was appropriate for her to remain there, but she wanted to return home. She didn't feel safe remaining in the apartment alone because she works from home and her partner has to travel for work on occasion. She wanted to move back in with her parents while pregnant to avoid being alone and save money on rent. Her boyfriend was also planning to move in with her at our apartment. So Sasha and my parents decided she would return home. That would have been okay with me, but they informed me I had to vacate my room for a few months since they required it for her. Sasha already had a room in our house, but after she left for college, Jacob converted it into an office. My parents informed me she couldn't stay in the living room, therefore the only option was for me to give up my room. They asked that I think of it as a sacrifice for my family. I might not have been as upset if they hadn't had this chat with me immediately before my first exam. I was already stressed from preparing for tests and I had a lot of exams coming up in the next 2 weeks. They only worried about Sasha and her pregnancy. I put my foot down and told them I wasn't leaving because Sasha had never treated me like family, so I didn't need to make any sacrifices for her. My parents attempted to reason with me, but I believed they were being unreasonable, and we argued until they snapped. Jacob told me I had to leave by the end of the week or I'd be tossed out, and no one could stop him because I was an adult. He stated that he had the right to decide whether or not I may stay at his place. I expected my mother to protect me, but instead she sided with Jacob. She stated they needed to make room for their real grandkids, and didn't have the time or energy to argue with me about it. She told me to do as I was told. My mom's use of the word real grandkids reaffirmed what I had already felt and known for years. My mom, Sasha, and Jacob were their own little family, and I had always been an outsider. I was really unhappy and decided to begin packing my things right away, oblivious to the fact that I had an exam the following day. They didn't even try to stop me as I departed, revealing where their priorities lay. I ended up on my best friend's doorstep. When I explained everything to her and her parents, they invited me to stay with them as long as I wanted. Many of you may wonder why I didn't ask for support from family members, but I don't know any. Jacob's family is exactly like him. They don't like me at all, and I knew addressing them would be futile. They would do everything they could to avoid helping me. My mother's side of the family is also unfamiliar to me. Apparently, her parents and the rest of the family abandoned her when she became pregnant with Sasha. They wanted her to concentrate on her studies and did not want her to continue with the pregnancy because she was too young. She did it anyhow, and no one has spoken to her since. They weren't even present for her wedding to my father, nor for Sasha's or my birth, as she told me. So since I had no relatives, I turned to my pals. After I was kicked out and moved in with my best friend and her family, I was continually expecting my mother to contact me. I had no such expectations of Jacob or Sasha because I knew they didn't care about me and were probably relieved I left because I never fit into their perfect family. What really hurt me was that my mother didn't contact me. After a few months, I gave up hope completely. A full year has passed since then, and I've heard from a few people that Sasha gave birth a few months back. She and her boyfriend have been sharing how pleased they are to be parents to their baby. The three of them are still living with my parents, perhaps to save money on rent. I honestly couldn't care less about any of it. I've been working on improving my own life. After I graduated from high school, I needed to figure out how to get to college. With little contact with my parents, I also lacked money. My best friend's parents had graciously allowed me to live rent-free, but I couldn't ask them to pay for my schooling, especially since they had 2 children of their own. I was anxious, but fortunately, I had applied for several scholarships. Because I'm a good student, I was able to obtain a scholarship from one of the institutions I applied to. It wasn't my first or even second choice, but I couldn't pass up the opportunity to save money. Sasha already had a room in our house, but after she left for college, Jacob converted it into an office. My parents informed me that she could not stay in the living room, so the only logical choice was for me to give up my room. They begged me to consider it a sacrifice for my family. If they hadn't told me this just before my first exam, I wouldn't have been so unhappy. I was already nervous about studying for my examinations, which were due in the following 2 weeks, but they seemed to be more concerned with Sasha and her pregnancy. I put my foot down and told them I wasn't leaving since Sasha had never treated me like family, so I didn't feel obligated to make any sacrifices for her. My parents attempted to reason with me, but I believed they were being unreasonable, and we argued until they snapped. Jacob told me that I had to go by the end of the week or I would be tossed out because I was legally an adult and he had the right to decide whether I stayed in his house or not. I expected my mother to protect me, but she sided with Jacob. She explained that they needed to make room for their real grandkids, and did not have the time or energy to argue with me about it. Hearing her refer to Sasha's children as real grandkids reinforced what I had assumed for years. My mother, Sasha, and Jacob had their own small family, and I had always been the outsider. I was so unhappy that I started packing my things right away, ignoring the fact that I had a test the next day. They didn't even try to stop me as I departed, revealing where their priorities lay. I landed up at my best friend's house, and after explaining everything to her and her parents, they invited me to stay with them as long as I needed. You might wonder why I didn't ask other family members for assistance, but I don't really have any. Jacob's family dislikes me, so I knew it would be fruitless to seek assistance. I never knew anyone on my mother's side of the family. My mother always told me that when she became pregnant with Sasha, her family cut her off because they wanted her to focus on her studies. They didn't want her to get pregnant since she was too young, but she did anyway, and no one has spoken to her since. They weren't even present for her wedding to my father, let alone either of our births, according to her. So I didn't think I had any relatives to turn to, so I went to my pals instead. After I was kicked out and moved in with my best friend and her family, I kept expecting my mother to contact me. I had no such expectations of Jacob or Sasha, as they clearly didn't care about me and were probably relieved that I had left. What pained me the most was that my mother did not reach out at all. After a few months, I gave up hope completely. It has been a year since then. I found out from friends that Sasha had given birth a few months ago and that she and her boyfriend have been posting about their new life as delighted parents. They are still living with my parents, probably to economize on rent. I honestly don't care about any of that stuff anymore. I've been working on improving my own life. After graduating from high school, I needed to figure out how to get to college. It wasn't easy without having my parents' financial assistance. My best friend's parents were generous enough to let me live rent-free, but I couldn't ask them to pay for my tuition, especially since they had 2 children of their own. I was apprehensive, but thankfully, I had applied for numerous scholarships, and because I was a brilliant student, I was awarded one. It was not my first or even second choice of education, but I couldn't pass up the opportunity to save money. The scholarship covered 60% of my tuition. So I chose to get a student loan alongside my closest friends' parents as co-signers. I promised them that they wouldn't have to worry about repaying the debt because I would work while studying and pay it off myself. That is what I have been doing. It's been difficult, but knowing I'm succeeding on my own is wonderful. I hadn't heard from my family in a year and I wasn't expecting them to seek out. Surprisingly, approximately a week ago, my mother emailed me and asked me to come home for the weekend. She claimed she missed me, as did Jacob and Sasha, and they wanted to reconcile with me. She stated they were aware they had treated me unfairly. In the email, my mother was unusually charming, faking sincerity. Call it gut instinct, but I sensed something was wrong and did not answer. A few days later, she wrote another email, which I disregarded as well, despite my need to find out what was going on. I realized there had to be another reason. It was improbable they would suddenly feel sorry a year after kicking me out. It looked overly convenient. I received my response 2 days ago, when my maternal grandparents contacted me. I was surprised they were able to contact me, as I was certain my parents had not given them my information. They explained that they had to inquire around and eventually obtained my phone number from one of my high school acquaintances, who trusted them enough to disclose it. It turned out to be my best buddy, and I'm glad she didn't tell me since it was a welcome surprise. My grandparents called, and I couldn't believe it was them. I've never known them, seen them, or heard their voices. I was hesitant at first, but then they FaceTimed me and showed me old photo albums of my mother from her childhood and adolescent years. That's when I started to believe they were my grandparents. We all got rather emotional. I'm not sure why, but I just did. We began talking, and I shared details about my life. I tried to avoid talking about my parents, but it was pointless because they already knew everything. They claimed that one of the main reasons they had not contacted me before was because of my parents. They recently discovered the truth, which prompted them to contact us. I was perplexed. My mother had always told me that when she became pregnant with Sasha, my grandparents cut her off. That was everything I knew. However, there was more to the story. My grandparents emphasized that they were not opposed to my mother having Sasha. Rather, they opposed her connection with Jacob. My mother had lied about her parents to safeguard Jacob's reputation. My grandparents had been supportive of her pregnancy and informed her she had the freedom to choose. However, they did not approve of Jacob because he was a well-known addict. They had all grown up in the same area, attended the same high school, and even went to the same college, so my grandparents were well aware of Jacob's background. They promised my mother that they would financially assist her during and after the pregnancy, but only if she broke up with Jacob. They didn't want him to influence her. After much thinking, my mother ended their relationship because Jacob couldn't get his life in order. My grandparents took complete custody of Sasha once she was born, and Jacob had only supervised visitation privileges for the first few years. Jacob eventually finished his degree and became clean, but he relapsed every several months, so my grandparents never trusted him completely. They introduced my mother to my father, who is the son of a family friend. After a few years of seeing one another on and off, my mother married him because she had given up hope that Jacob would ever recover. But it appears she has never completely moved on from Jacob. A year into her marriage, she began an affair with him and became pregnant again. At that time, my mother had to tell my father about the affair since she couldn't picture her life without Jacob. Now that she was pregnant, she needed to tell him the truth. Her infidelity was the reason she got a divorce from my father and later married Jacob. So everything Mom said about my father's opposition to having me was a lie. After I was born, many paternity tests were performed, and I was happily not Jacob's child. I was, in fact, my biological father's daughter, which was a relief because I had no desire to be Jacob's biological daughter. My father even had partial custody of me for a period, although I scarcely remember it because it was so long ago. Unfortunately, my biological father died in a vehicle accident when I was 7 months old, allowing my mother to lie to me for the remainder of my life. My father's side of the family refused to have anything to do with me after his death, which was convenient for my mother. My grandparents were really disturbed when they discovered my mother was having an affair with Jacob. They gave her another ultimatum. She could either shut Jacob out of her life completely and focus on her marriage with my father, or she could get a divorce and never speak to them again. This time, my mother chose Jacob because he had been clean for about a year, longer than any of his previous stints. That was the final major disagreement my mother had with her parents. My mother was still pregnant at the time, and they did not communicate again until after my birth. My grandparents ultimately softened and decided to contact her so they could meet me, but Jacob refused to play along and form a happy family with them because of how they had treated him. So my mother turned down their attempts to reunite. My grandparents did not give up, however. They attempted to contact my mother every several months, but she never accepted them back into her life. This continued on for years until Jacob and my mother had financial difficulties and were unable to pay their rent. My mother had no one else to turn to, so she contacted her parents. In a great gesture, my grandparents gave her a house, hoping that it would bring them closer together. It was about 6 years ago when my family moved into our new home. It was a great improvement over the apartment we used to live in. I'd often wondered how my parents could afford such a wonderful property in such a desirable neighborhood, given that my mother was a receptionist and Jacob worked in sales. His company had been failing, so it seemed unlikely that they could afford it. I now realize that was all thanks to my grandparents. Despite this, my parents, being the ungrateful people they are, did not attempt to repair their relationship with my grandparents. Both my mother and Jacob were aware that my grandparents had paid for the house, but my mother insisted that they were not ready to reconnect and needed time to think about it. My grandparents, being naive, gave them room for a few months, but when my mother did not respond, they tried again. She kept claiming that she needed more time. This went on for years, and my grandparents eventually admitted that perhaps it wasn't meant to be. They were getting older and told me how humiliating it was to continually attempting to contact their daughter only to be denied each time. They finally admitted to my mother that they understood why she no longer wanted to be around them and regretted themselves for not being gentler in the past. The only thing they wanted was that my mother continue to send photos of our family so that they knew we were doing fine. Surprisingly, my mother agreed, and for the past few years, that was how my grandparents stayed in touch, which was quite sad. They told me everything, and I burst into tears. I had always thought of them as villains, but that was not the case. Now, as for how they discovered the truth. My grandfather just had a health scare with heart problems, and he and my grandma realized they couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. Because they weren't getting any younger, they wanted to make one final attempt to reconcile with the family before passing away. They stopped by my mother's house a few weeks ago, which is technically still theirs because they paid for it and their names are on the deed. When they came, my mother had no choice but to welcome and entertain them. They discovered they were great-grandparents when Sasha had her children. But when they asked about me, my parents became really uneasy and had no idea what to say. So they informed my grandparents that I was away at college and that it might not be a good time to contact me because I was in a vulnerable state due to examinations. They couldn't even come up with a false college name, which led my grandparents to suspect something was up. They had a gut feeling that my parents had made a mistake, so they left the house to speak with our neighbors. That is how they discovered that I had not been living with my parents for the past year after being kicked out. The neighbors didn't know why, but their son, who went to school with me, informed my grandparents that I had been staying with my closest friend's family for a while, and they could know more. That's how my grandparents got in touch with my best buddy, and they eventually found out what happened to me. Naturally, they were furious when they discovered the truth. My grandparents informed my mother that she and her family would need to evacuate the house in order to make room for their only real grandchild. It was the epitome of retaliation, using the identical things my parents had used to me. My best friend ensured that my grandparents knew just how to press that nerve. It now became clear why my parents were attempting to reach out and make amends. They were going to lose their home. My grandparents waited a few days to approach me after learning everything because they were concerned about how I would respond. They eventually decided to go forward with it since they had wasted so many years worrying about how my mother would respond, and they wanted to do the right thing now. However, my grandparents also wanted to give me the freedom to choose what I wanted. They told me that if I wanted to give my family another chance, they could continue to live in the house. But if I wanted them to leave, that is what would happen. Apparently, when they came, no one in the family seemed pleased to see them, and I was the only one who appeared truly interested in developing a relationship with them. My grandparents refused to be taken for fools anymore, so I had to decide whether I wanted my parents to have a home or not. If I'm being honest, I suppose I want them tossed out, but that sounds a little harsh. I'm not sure whether that's the appropriate thing to do. What if I told my grandparents I wanted to kick my family out? Update 1. Hello, first and foremost, thank you for all of your encouraging words. It means everything to me, and I appreciate it more than I can express. Regarding my decision, I've concluded that I do want my family to leave that house. I told my grandparents a few days ago, and now they're evicting my family. Of course, there's a lot of legal stuff involved, which my grandparents say I don't need to worry about. My parents have also been emotionally manipulative, particularly Sasha, but my grandparents are impervious to it. After speaking with me, they learned about all the falsehoods my mother had been spreading and how she had poisoned their grandchildren against them. They have no more sympathy for my parents. To be honest, Sasha and her partner are working grown-ups, so I'm confident they'll find something out, just like millions of others. The same applies for my parents. I don't feel guilty about any of it. After all, they didn't feel horrible about kicking me out, knowing I was just 18 and still in school. Despite this, I was able to perform well academically, even though it occurred just before my exams. I urged my grandparents not to worry about my college tuition, but they insisted on handling the student loan I had taken out. They also apologized for not being present for me sooner. We have a lot to talk about and make up for, but everything is going great right now. Update 2. Hello, my grandparents began evicting my family a few weeks back, and they have till the end of next month to depart. My mother is not pleased about it. She felt compelled to inform me, writing an email a few weeks ago in an attempt to regain my trust and heal things, most likely so her parents wouldn't kick her out. The email was quite different from the one I had received before. This one was full of swear words, saying she wished she hadn't given birth to me. She even said she wishes I had been in the vehicle accident with my father, so we might both have died. So that's my mom for you. But it no longer bothers me since, to me, she is not family. If I'm being honest, my only family now consists of my grandparents, my best friend, her parents, and a few relatives whom my grandparents are introducing me to. My mother broke them off long ago since she didn't want anything to do with her family. It's an unusual scenario, but I'm adjusting. Update 3. Hello, the holidays have just begun, and I'm back home in my old house. It feels strange to be here, but my grandparents have been living in the house since my family departed, and they've done an excellent job of renovating it. Even my room seems like home again. We'll be throwing a Thanksgiving dinner shortly, and we've invited some family members, my best friend, and her parents. I feel like my life is finally getting back on track. I'm very happy, and I wish I could stay this way forever.
Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you.
I was always seen as the disappointing daughter. while my sister was the golden child. The truth about her came to light at my wedding. I, 42F, have had a prosperous career as a research professor at a prominent institution, but I have always been the disappointing daughter in my family. I had to tell my tale now, after decades of silence. Since we were small, my younger sister Ava, 38 degrees Fahrenheit, has been the golden child, and their obvious partiality has finally reached a breaking point, shattering our entire family dynamic. The faint sting of comparison permeates my earliest recollections. When I was 8 years old, I recall sitting in my room excitedly reading my scientific books as my mother's voice could be heard downstairs. "Why can't you be more gregarious like your sister?" At the age of 6, Ava had already captured our parents' attention by entertaining their acquaintances in the living room with her theatrical acts. I spent hours disassembling and reassembling old clocks, interested in the mechanics of how things worked, while Ava was performing and receiving all the attention. It was an early pattern. I requested a chemistry set for my 10th birthday, but instead I received some used novels because books are more practical. 2 months later, Ava expressed interest in taking dance lessons, and our parents unexpectedly found money for private instruction, complete with new ballet shoes and specially designed tutus. That same year, when I sought to join the school science club, Mom groaned about the cost and advised me to concentrate on making friends instead. In those early years, my lone family ally was my grandma, Martha. Her home, which was only a few blocks away, turned into my haven. I would spend weekends with Grandma Martha while my parents took Ava to acting classes and dance performances. Before she retired, she taught science in high school, and she fostered my curiosity in a manner that my parents did not. "Your mind is a gift," she would say as she taught me about the constellations from her backyard or assisted me in doing easy experiments in her kitchen. When we were teenagers, the difference in how we were treated became glaringly apparent. My renewable energy project won the state science fair when I was 14 years old. My parents said they had to take Ava to a crucial audition, so they didn't even go to the ceremony. Our parents gave Ava a lavish celebration that year, inviting the whole extended family and even hiring a photographer, after she was cast in a small role in a local theatrical performance. High school was a haze of scholastic success that was not acknowledged at home. In addition to maintaining a 4.0 GPA, I served as president of the scientific club and editor of the school newspaper. Ava was starring in school plays and dating the football captain at the same time. Her social life and her theater endeavors were the topic of every dinner talk. If my academic achievements were recognized at all, they were just given a cursory nod. I had obtained a full scholarship to study biochemistry at a prominent university by the time my college acceptance letters arrived. When Ava decided she wanted to go to a pricey private institution for performing arts, our parents sold our vacation cabin to pay for her education. My mother's response, rather than one of pride, was, "At least we won't have to worry about your tuition." They remarked, "Ava shows such promise. We can't let her talent go to waste." I pushed myself into my studies during my undergraduate years, finding comfort in the lab where my intelligence and dedication were at last acknowledged. My teachers supported my academic endeavors and encouraged my research, becoming the mentors I had always desired. I received full financing for a prestigious PhD school after graduating with honors. Ava received a callback for a commercial audition, so my parents left early even though they were at my graduation. I effectively and steadily developed my career during my 20s and 30s. I obtained substantial research funds, published widely, and at 40, I was granted tenure, which is an uncommon accomplishment in academia. However, the topic of Ava's most recent acting career or her marriage to Richard, a prosperous real estate developer, always came up during family get-togethers. The conclusion drawn from my molecular biology research achievements was, "Oh, Emily's still doing her science things." When I met David, a researcher in my department, I felt like I had finally found bliss. He seemed to share my enthusiasm for scientific advancement and to comprehend me. Our partnership developed organically as a result of our same interests, and we worked together on multiple papers. I believed that when he proposed last year, I would finally have a typical milestone that my family could recognize and celebrate. However, things fell apart in the most catastrophic way last week. In order to finish some data for our most recent paper, I stayed late at the lab. I discovered David and Ava sharing a passionate hug on his desk when I went to his office to deliver the results. My fiancée and my married sister were having an affair. Even worse than the heartbreaking betrayal was what transpired afterward. Our parents were immediately worried about Ava when I told them. My mother begged, "Please don't tell Richard. Think about your sister's marriage. He has a prenup. She'll lose everything if this gets out." In agreement, my father said, "These things happen, Emily. You need to be the bigger person here. I've been the bigger person for 40 years. When they held lavish celebrations for Ava but missed my birthdays, I remained silent. They flew across the nation to attend Ava's community theater performances, but I remained silent when they missed my PhD defense. When they told me I needed to learn how to be financially independent but assisted Ava in purchasing her first home, I swallowed my hurt. Amidst all of this turmoil, an unforeseen event occurred. I met Michael at a university fundraising event 3 weeks ago. He was come to deliver the ideas for our new science facility. He is a 45-meter architect who creates research facilities. When I discuss my work, Michael listens with true attention, unlike David, who frequently engaged in intellectual competition with me. He poses intelligent queries and discusses his own imaginative technique for creating environments that support scientific advancement. When I called my grandmother, Martha, last week to tell her about Michael, she detected the shift in my voice. She remarked, "You sound lighter, dear. Tell me about this architect of yours." We spent 2 hours discussing everything, including how Michael's eyes light up when he talks about how art and science intersect in his designs, how he asked me to comment on his early sketches for the new research wing, and how, when we reconnected for coffee, he remembered every detail about my work. There is a clear difference between how my family treated David and how they responded to Michael. Whenever I brought about David at family get-togethers, they would instantly turn the topic to Ava's most recent accomplishments. However, my parents really stopped their normal compliments on Ava's acting career to listen when I brought up Michael to my aunt during a recent family dinner. Naturally, they were able to change it to Ava in a matter of minutes. "An architect, huh? Did you know that a well-known architect is married to Ava's yoga class friend? Tell Emily about him, Ava." I recognize the irony of my current circumstance. I've been a successful professional for decades, receiving recognition that my folks hardly notice. My mother is mainly worried about whether I'm getting enough light in the lab, even though I've published groundbreaking research that may result in new treatments for genetic illnesses. Ava, on the other hand, has alternated between little parts in community theater shows and commercials, and she is given the attention of an Oscar at every audition. For my work on cellular regeneration, I was awarded the coveted Morrison Grant last month. In my field, it's a huge accomplishment because only 3 researchers are chosen year nationwide. My mother said, "That's nice, dear, but did you hear about Ava's latest role?" when I called to tell her the news. In a national ad, she has 3 complete lines. They celebrated Ava landing the commercial part with a family supper later that week. My grant was not mentioned. In fact, I had visited David's office to show him the grant acceptance letter the day I saw him and Ava together. Since we had collaborated on some of the initial research, I assumed he would be pleased. Rather, I discovered him with my sister, clutching the doorframe in disbelief as my engagement ring glinted on my finger and her luxury dress was tied up around her waist. The events that followed seemed to have been a blur. David's rambling justifications about feeling neglected because I spent too much time in the lab, Ava's casual, "Oh Emily," as she adjusted her clothing, and my parents' anxious calls after I told them, all of which were intended to preserve Ava's marriage and reputation. Nobody ever inquired about my emotional state. As usual, I went to my lab the following day. My haven has always been science, the one field where hard work and intelligence are regarded more highly than flamboyance and where outcomes are more important than showmanship. I was able to spend a few hours immersed in actual problems with measurable answers as my graduate students talked about their most recent research. However, something had changed within me. For the first time in my life, I felt outraged rather than just wounded by my family's actions. I'm actually furious. It was a powerful, freeing wrath instead of the silent resentment I'd harbored for years. I recognized that I no longer needed their approval after glancing at the grant letter on my desk, the papers I had published, and the students eagerly awaiting my direction. It had been years since I needed it. I had dinner with Michael that night. Since the fundraiser, we had been hanging out informally, but I had been reluctant to divulge too much about my family's circumstances. I felt comfortable telling him everything because of his consistent presence and sincere interest in my opinions. His architect's eyes were analytical and concentrated as I explained 42 years of systematic dismissal and favoritism, and he listened without interjecting. Michael was silent for a while after I had done speaking. Then he said something that gave me a whole new perspective on my predicament. In the field of architecture, we occasionally come across structures that appear flawless on the outside but have serious structural problems that cannot be resolved by cosmetic remodeling. In these situations, the most considerate thing we can do is admit that the structure is no longer safe and construct a new one. I've tried being the ideal daughter, the smart researcher, the understanding sister, and I've minimized my accomplishments to avoid overshadowing Ava and downplayed them to spare my parents the cognitive dissonance of having to acknowledge them while maintaining their narrative of Ava as the special one. He's right. I've spent my entire life trying to fix a fundamentally flawed family structure. Grandma Martha, who is 92 years old and still as sharp as ever, always sees right through the dynamics of our family. Last night, I had supper with her. Your parents have spent so much time making Ava the star of their show that they've forgotten there are other stories worth telling, she added, swirling her tea with a poise that belies her advanced age. But you, my dear, have been writing your own story all along. Perhaps it's time to stop letting them edit it, she continued after taking my hand. I am writing this now because I have made up my mind. Michael and I have been talking about getting married, not engaged yet, but headed that way. And when the time comes, I will not have a large family wedding, nor will I invite my parents or Ava, who will inevitably try to make it about her in some way. Instead, I will have a small celebration with the people who have truly supported me, including Grandma Martha, my Aunt Linda, my co-workers who appreciate my work, and Michael's family, who have shown me more sincere interest in 3 weeks than my own parents have in 42 years. I let Ava's attempt to call me go to voicemail yesterday, and she left a message saying that I'm overreacting to the situation with David and that she wanted to explain. She concluded by reminding me that she is my only sister and that families should forgive each other, which I deleted without answering. For the first time in my life, I'm putting my happiness ahead of my family's meticulously crafted story, choosing to be surrounded by people who appreciate me for who I am rather than who they wish me to be, and celebrating my accomplishments without downplaying them to stroke someone else's pride. But here's the thing, I'm a scientist, and I deal in observable facts. And the facts are that they broke up this family long ago, piece by piece, every time they chose to devalue one daughter in order to elevate the other. I know there will be fallout when my parents realize I'm serious about cutting contact. They'll probably tell everyone that I'm being dramatic, that I'm jealous of Ava's success, and that I'm destroying the family. I have my research, my students, my grants, and now, possibly, a partner who sees me clearly and values what he sees. So here I am at 42, finally prepared to do the most important experiment of my life, seeing who I can be without the weight of their expectations and disappointments. Perhaps that's more than enough. Perhaps that's everything. First update. 3 months have passed since my previous post, and a lot has transpired. Let's start with the good news. Michael and I are officially engaged. He proposed last weekend while we were going over the final blueprints for the new research center. He had concealed the ring in a blueprint tube, and it was the ideal combination of thoughtful, subtle, and wholly us. Let me give you a little background so you can see how far I've come. After the David and Ava disaster, I threw myself into the new research facility project, and working with Michael became my haven. As my family called me non-stop to ask me to forgive Ava and keep the peace, Michael and I spent long hours talking about how to create the ideal laboratory spaces. The interaction itself was a huge contrast to my experience with David, who made the proposal at a department meeting, making it all about getting attention from the public. With David, everything was a competition, who had more publications, whose research was more innovative. Michael, however, made it personal and significant. My Aunt Linda, who was sincerely delighted for us, sent the bad news to my parents, and within hours, my phone was overflowing with messages. "Why didn't you tell us you were seeing someone serious?" was Mom's initial reaction, rather than "congratulations. Ava may have compared you to her friend's architect spouse." The guilt tripping then began. "We should have been the first to know. We're your parents." It didn't matter that they hadn't inquired about my life once in the 3 months since the David incident. They were too preoccupied with helping Ava cope with the anxiety of possibly being discovered having another affair. Mom called in tears, claiming that I was denying Ava her position as maid of honor and family tradition. When I reminded her that Ava wasn't even invited, she fell silent for a full minute before giving a speech about forgiveness and family ties. That's when the real drama began. Richard has been aloof ever since David, my ex-fiancé, began working as a personal trainer at his company's fitness center. Yes, you read correctly, David quit academia to pursue a career in personal training. It seems that he and Ava have been seeing each other at the gym. Richard isn't aware of this yet, but people are talking about it. During this trying time, Ava has been phoning me every day and left messages about how she needs her big sister. In contrast, my research has thrived amidst all of this turmoil. Last week, we were awarded further funding for our cellular regeneration study, and the grant committee particularly mentioned the creative lab design Michael and I created together as a contributing reason. Grandma Martha was thrilled when I contacted her to tell her the news. "That's my girl," she remarked proudly. His mother, a retired judge who truly knows the complexities of the situation, said me something that truly spoke to me. "Family isn't about sharing DNA, it's about sharing respect." Michael's family has been incredible throughout this entire ordeal. One of my best friends is his sister, a professor of literature. Michael and I had our first real date in the botanical gardens, where he had asked me to discuss the greenhouse specifications for the new research facility. We ended up talking for hours about everything from architectural history to photosynthesis, which is why the wedding planning has been surprisingly calm, mainly because we are keeping it small and meaningful. Grandma Martha, who has been more of a parent to me than my own parents ever were, is the only member of my immediate family who will be there when Michael and I meet with her tomorrow to show her our wedding preparations, and to be honest, it seems perfect. Michael joins me for some sessions, and his insights as an architect often provide interesting perspectives. Emotional boundaries are like load-bearing walls. They're not about keeping people out. They're about maintaining structural integrity, he said in our most recent session. I've started going to a therapist to process all of this, and she's helping me understand that it's okay to set boundaries, even with family. For now, I'm concentrating on my research, my future spouse, and finally putting myself first. I'll provide another update once we have a clear wedding date. For the first time in my life, I feel appreciated and seen for who I am, not because I'm someone's sister or daughter. Second update. 2 more months have passed since my last update, and I wish I could report that things have improved with my family. The wedding is in 3 weeks, and instead of being a happy period of preparation, my parents and Ava have caused yet another family crisis. We meticulously organized everything, a small ceremony in the botanical gardens, followed by a private reception. I made it clear to my parents that Ava was not invited, and the guests were chosen to include my grandmother Martha, a few close relatives who have always been there for me, my coworkers, and Michael's family. My Aunt Linda called to warn me after overhearing Ava boasting about the surprise she was planning for my wedding, and it turned out that she had already purchased a dress that, in her own words, will show everyone what a real star looks like. I learned yesterday that my parents had not only informed Ava about the wedding details, but had actively encouraged her to attend. When I confronted my parents, they pretended that they were helping me. "We couldn't let you make the mistake of excluding your only sister," Mom said, adding, "She's got a beautiful speech about sisterly forgiveness. It will make the wedding so much more meaningful." This was the most frustrating part. They responded, "But she's going through such a difficult time with Richard. He's been so cold to her lately, and she needs her family's support." I had to reiterate that someone who had an affair with my ex-fiancé is not allowed to speak about forgiveness at my wedding. With his exact words, "The only dramatic performance happening at our wedding will be our vows." Michael, who has been tremendously supportive throughout this whole ordeal, quickly phoned our wedding venue to set up extra security after I informed him of Ava's planned intrusion. The irony that Ava's marriage to Richard is disintegrating at the same time that I'm starting a new life with Michael is not lost on me. Richard has finally begun to inquire about her frequent gym visits with David, and my Aunt Linda claims that there have been some tense arguments at their home. Nevertheless, in my parents' eyes, this makes Ava the victim who requires assistance rather than the mastermind behind her own demise. In addition to the gym, my colleague noticed David and Ava eating lunch together at a cafe close to the university, looking very intimate. I brought this up to my mother in the hopes that she would finally notice the pattern, but she dismissed it as Ava being a supportive friend to someone going through a career change. My parents tried a new strategy this week. Dad, who has never shown up at my lab without warning in my academic career, tried to persuade me that keeping Ava out would create a rift that can never be healed. The rift was created when you consistently chose her over me. It was widened when you dismissed her betrayal of my trust, I said, looking at him standing there, this man who had never taken an interest in my work. "Don't worry about Ava," Grandma Martha, bless her, assured me. "I'll be stationed at the entrance. She wouldn't dare try to get past me." Grandma Martha, who is 92 years old and still sharp as a tack and doesn't take foolish people well, offered to run interference on the wedding day. My research lab has become my haven during all of this chaos. The clarity of data analysis and the precision of scientific work are a welcome contrast to the emotional manipulation I'm dealing with at home. Michael's brother, who works in private security, has also arranged for a few colleagues to be present, disguised as guests. I've hired additional security for the wedding, though it pains me that I have to protect my own wedding from my sister's intrusion. The venue has been given photos of Ava and strict instructions not to allow her entry. 3 weeks before the wedding, I should be thrilled about marrying the amazing man who supports my career, knows my boundaries, and loves me for who I am, but instead I'm planning how to prevent my own sister from ruining my wedding day. My graduate students have noticed my increased presence in the lab, but they've been incredibly supportive. I will provide another update following the wedding. Regardless of Ava's presence, I am getting married to Michael. I will no longer allow my family's drama to overshadow my happiness. Third update, Yesterday was the wedding, and while I wish I could say everything went well, my family did manage to pull off one last dramatic moment, but this time, something unexpected happened. The truth was revealed, and the fallout was both painful and freeing. Ava, as usual, wore a white dress that looked more appropriate for a red carpet event than a morning garden wedding, and our parents showed up at the botanical gardens despite all our precautions, my mother sobbing uncontrollably about how cruel it was to exclude them while my father tried to reason with the security team. When Grandma Martha and Michael's sister came, I was in the bridal suite with them, and as I saw the chaos at the door through the window, something inside of me finally broke. It all came to a head when I stepped out to the entrance still wearing my wedding dress after years of being the nice daughter, being silent as they denigrated me, and watched them justify Ava's actions. "Emily, how could you do this to me? I'm your sister. I came here to support you, to show you how much I love you," Ava said as she launched into her performance. When she saw Richard's car arrive into the parking lot, she stopped talking. Yes, it was Richard, her husband, who had reportedly followed her there. A scene from a movie played out when Richard confronted Ava about her relationship with David. Despite her best efforts to deny it, David called her phone, which was on speaker, and everyone heard him ask whether she would still be coming over later. My mother then turned to me and exclaimed, "Look what you've done. If you had just invited your sister properly, none of this would have happened," rather than confronting Ava about her actions. The last straw was that. I answered in a surprisingly composed voice. "No, Mom. These are her decisions, not mine. She chose to have an affair with my fiancé while she was married, to attend my wedding without being invited in white, and to keep seeing David behind Richard's back. 3 years ago, I found Ava and my then fiancé David, together in his office," I began, turning to our guests. When I told our parents, they never once asked how I was feeling. They were only concerned with protecting Ava's marriage because Richard has a prenuptial agreement. Richard's expression changed from hurt to angry. "A prenup? Is that why you've been pretending everything's fine?" he asked Ava, who revealed everything through mascara and tears. The affair with David had been going on before he and I were engaged, and she had pursued him out of boredom and because she couldn't stand that for once I had something she didn't. My parents, who were still apparently more worried about Ava's failing marriage than their other daughter's wedding day, followed as Richard turned and left without saying another word, and Ava ran after him while yelling his name. Following their departure, an extraordinary event occurred. The remaining guests, which included my co-workers, Michael's family, Grandma Martha, and the relatives who had consistently witnessed Ava's deception, surrounded us in a protective circle. Michael's mother, a retired judge, then asked, "Now, shall we have a wedding?" Michael's vows moved me to tears. He pledged to love me and to always see me, to value my mind as much as my heart, and to create a life based on mutual respect and understanding. The ceremony was lovely, with the gardens in full bloom and the morning sun casting a natural spotlight through the trees. My Aunt Linda told me today that Richard is divorcing Ava, and the prenuptial agreement means she will receive nothing. My parents are inconsolable, trying to find out how to support her, but for the first time in my life, I don't feel compelled to join in the drama. In between hiking excursions and wine tastings, Michael and I will be visiting some of the most cutting-edge research facilities in the world on our 2-week honeymoon in New Zealand, which is the ideal fusion of science and leisure, much like us. Some of the most significant experiments are the ones where everything goes wrong but you end up discovering something revolutionary, Grandma Martha observed when she called to see how I was doing this morning. As always, she is correct. Amid all of that craziness, I found my own strength. I'm not sure what the future holds for my family, but I'm concentrating on my new life with Michael, my research, and the family we've chosen, one based on genuine love and respect for one another rather than duty and rivalry. I have a feeling my parents will eventually try to get in touch with me, most likely to ask me to help Ava get back on her feet. It's time to begin my honeymoon with my amazing spouse, who loves me because of my commitment to science, not because of it. This will be my last update. Cheers to fresh starts, unambiguous boundaries, and at last, the freedom to be who I truly am.
Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more.
Parents used my wedding fund for my twins' lavish celebration. So I finally cut them off, but now they're back needing my help. I, 28F, must explain everything here. I've had this rivalry with my twin sister Emily for as long as I can remember. In my case, it wasn't just between us, but I suppose that's normal for siblings. Without even recognizing it, my parents were deliberately pressuring us into it. I was just there, and they've always treated Emily like she's something unique. I'll tell you why this occurred. Emily is precisely 12 minutes my senior. You heard correctly, 12 minutes. It seems that's all it takes to be my family's golden child. Emily was their miracle baby, the one who could do no wrong, from the day we were born. I wasn't a horrible kid or anything, but she always received the credit for whatever I did. My first recollection of this partiality dates back to kindergarten. Both of us participated in the school play. I played the main part in Little Red Riding Hood and Emily got 2 lines as a flower. Emily started crying on stage during the concert after forgetting her lines. My parents missed my entire performance as they hurried to console her right away. Later that evening, they didn't even recognize my accomplishment. All they could speak about was Emily's bravery for trying. For the duration of primary school, this pattern persisted. Emily would be told, "Oh honey, you tried your best," if she received a C on an exam, but I would hardly be acknowledged if I received consecutive A's. I recall working on a science fair project about renewable energy for weeks in 4th grade. I conducted research, constructed models, and even spoke with regional environmental specialists. When I handed my parents the blue ribbon for winning first place, they hardly gave it a glance. Emily had a difficult day during volleyball practice, but that's still wonderful. Can we discuss this at a later time? After that, I stopped showing them my honors. The worst thing was that they made no effort to conceal their partiality. My dad used to make jokes at family get-togethers about how Emily was their firstborn and, despite the fact that we are twins, those 12 minutes somehow made her the older sister. "Emily is our responsible one. She looks after her younger sister," he would remark. I was standing there, listening to them reduce me to Emily's shadow and nothing more. Things started to have a significant psychological impact on me in middle school. I became quite driven to prove myself. I joined as many clubs as I could, including the student council, the debate team, and the math club. I was motivated to excel at everything, so I studied late into the night. Emily, on the other hand, coasted through, doing very little but somehow receiving more attention and recognition. One particular incident in particular sticks out. I was selected to compete in the state-level mathematics competition on behalf of our school in the 8th grade. I prepared for months, frequently studying until 2 or 3 in the morning. Emily had a recreational soccer match on the same day as the competition. In addition to not showing up to help, my parents didn't even inquire about how I was doing. All they could speak about when I brought home the trophy for second place was how Emily needed to be cheered up because her team had lost their game. With greater stakes, high school was more of the same. I was still participating in as many extracurricular activities as I could, taking all of my AP classes, and keeping my GPA at 4.0. Emily spent much of her time at parties and barely kept up a C average. She was still the fun and social one though, and I was criticized for being too competitive and serious. The discrepancy was brought to light during our senior year. Because of my academic accomplishments, I was named valedictorian, accepted on a full scholarship to a top university, and even had an article in the local newspaper. Emily enrolled at community college after barely graduating. However, my parents bemoaned Emily's failure to get into her first choice school for the whole of our graduation celebration, which was meant to be for the 2 of us. In their address, they made no mention of my accomplishments. The pivotal moment occurred while attending college. I continued to keep perfect grades while working part-time to support myself while attending a prestigious institution to study computer science. I would return home from every break with the hope that something had changed and that perhaps my parents had begun to see my value. Instead, it was Emily this, and Emily that. Somehow her decision to leave community college after just 1 semester was interpreted as a sign that she was brave enough to follow her own path. Then, in my junior year, came Thanksgiving break. Everything changed when my uncle, who had always had a slightly excessive love for alcohol, made a mistake. He disclosed that my parents hadn't even intended to have twins while he was thinking back on my mom's pregnancy. They were devastated to learn they were expecting 2 children when they had only intended to have 1. My dad, being the docile person he is, simply shrugged and said, "We'll figure it out." My mom had been concerned about how they would manage 2 babies. However, their method of figuring it out was to basically choose a favorite and focus all of their energy on her, which was of course, Emily, their cherished firstborn. In their minds, those pivotal 12 minutes were the difference. After years of wondering why they didn't care about my accomplishments, everything suddenly fell into perspective when my uncle confessed this to me when we were seated at the dinner table. It all made perfect sense. I was the afterthought and the unexpected addition, not the child they had hoped for. Something in me altered after that realization. I gave up trying to please them. I put all of my attention into creating my own life instead. I gave my all to my coursework and internships, wanting to succeed for myself, not for them. I received several job offers from prestigious tech businesses by the time I graduated. I took a job at a promising startup as a software engineer, and after 3 years, I was promoted to senior developer. Emily, meanwhile, was organizing this lavish wedding after meeting a wealthy man at a pub and having a brief flirtation. Naturally, my folks were ecstatic. They couldn't even recall the name of the company I worked for, yet they spent hours on the phone with her talking about the specifics of the wedding. My company was getting ready for an initial public offering, IPO, and my stock options were worth more than Emily's fiancé made in a year. The irony was that I was actually doing very well. They never inquired about my professional background. It was the wedding fund situation that ultimately crushed my heart. The only one who had ever treated us fairly was our grandmother. She left each of us a sizable sum of money before she died, especially for our upcoming weddings. She had been very explicit that we were to share the money evenly. She told me in private that she was aware of my parents' treatment of me and that this was her method of making sure I would have something that was exclusively mine. Naturally, though, my parents were unable to honor her last desires. Emily wanted this ridiculously lavish wedding, complete with a celebrity photographer, a fancy outfit, and several locations. They chose to take from my share of the inheritance rather than urging her to cut back or asking her wealthy fiancé to contribute more. They didn't even tell me. They didn't ask. It wasn't until months after the wedding that my inebriated uncle, yes, the same one, spoke about it at another family get-together. They responded angrily when I confronted them about it. "Oh honey," my mother remarked, dismissively waving her hand, "we were going to tell you eventually. When we can, we'll reimburse you." Even worse was my father's reply. "Well, Emily needed it more. She's the conventional one getting married, and since you're so preoccupied with your work, it's unlikely that you'll even desire a lavish wedding." I felt nothing as I stood in their kitchen staring at these folks who were meant to be my parents. This deep emptiness, without any sadness or rage. They were unable to even comprehend the wrongness of what they had done. They believed that since it was for Emily, it was totally acceptable to take my inheritance without my consent. Emily had always been the focus. I returned to my flat that evening and gave my life a lot of thought. I came to see that Emily had eclipsed or completely disregarded every significant turning point, accomplishment, and proud moment. My graduation from high school. They were too preoccupied in comforting Emily over her grades. Due to Emily's difficulties at community college, my college scholarship was hardly recognized. Emily was preparing for her wedding, so she disregarded my first promotion. I did something I should have done years ago when I opened my laptop. I emailed them and said, "I am aware of the wedding fund. I am aware that, without consulting me, you used my inheritance to pay for Emily's wedding. The way you've treated me throughout my life is more important than the money. You never made an effort to conceal the reality that I was never the daughter you desired. I'm done attempting to win your affection and acceptance. I'm over being the kid you didn't want. Do not get in touch with me again unless it is to repay my money, please." I felt a tremendous weight lift off my shoulders as I pushed send, banned their numbers, and deleted them from all social media. I didn't have to worry about trying to meet Emily's standards or gaining acceptance that I would never receive for the first time in my life. It has been a life-changing year. I gave my job and personal development my all attention. My stock options are now worth more than Emily's whole wedding expenses because our company's initial public offering, IPO, was a success. I started therapy to address my childhood trauma, purchased my own home in a desirable area of the city, and formed sincere friendships with individuals who genuinely respect me for who I am. Occasionally, Emily makes an effort to connect with distant family members or mutual friends. She will write things like, "Family should stick together," or "You're still my sister." But as she saw our parents discount my accomplishments throughout the years, where was this sense of family? When she joyfully received my inheritance for her wedding, where was that? She shared our parents' complicity in everything. Some relatives have attempted to place the blame on me by claiming that I'm being too severe, that blood is thicker than water, and other such things. However, these are the same individuals who silently observed my parents' years-long favoritism of Emily. They remained silent after seeing my treatment. They are no longer able to express an opinion. It's interesting because cutting them off has made me realize who my true family is. My therapist, who is helping me see that none of this was my fault. My coworkers, who applaud my accomplishments, and my college best friend, who assisted me in moving into my new home. The ones that genuinely care about me are these. I have been offered a role as team lead at the firm I work for, which recently launched a new office in a different state. I'm making a decision for the first time in my life without considering how it will compare to Emily or what my parents will say, and it's a great opportunity. It feels amazing to be living my life for myself. Am I the jerk for cutting them off entirely? Reddit? I often question whether I'm being overly dramatic, But every time I consider the possibility of getting back in touch with them, I reflect back on all the years I spent feeling inadequate, and I know I made the correct decision. It's going to get even more complicated now, though, and I need your honest thoughts on what I should do next. Update 1. 2 weeks ago, everything changed drastically. My phone began ringing with several calls from my uncle when I was in the middle of a team meeting. My initial reaction was to ignore it because family calls always indicate turmoil, but I decided to answer it because there was something unique about receiving several calls in quick succession. He began, trembling a little. "Hey, it's Uncle Greg." I knew right away that something was amiss. He is typically the type of guy that remains positive even in the face of adversity. "I need to discuss your parents with you." I felt sick to my stomach. I knew this couldn't be good news because I hadn't heard from them in 2 years. "What's happening?" Trying to speak steadily, I asked. "They were involved in an accident. A rather poor one. They are in the medical facility." He paused, and I heard him inhaling deeply. "Their car was struck by a truck that ran a red light. Your dad is in critical condition, and your mom has several fractures. They have spent a few days in the hospital." Days. I said it again, raising my voice. "And until now, no one had the idea to tell me." He said, "They wanted me to let you know," in a calmer tone. "I believe, they want to see you, I believe. That's not all though. Their insurance is having issues." There was, of course. He went on to tell me that 6 months prior, my parents had allowed their health insurance to lapse. They had been having financial difficulties due to credit card debt and poor investments. They were far from being discharged from the hospital, and the medical bills were already mounting. "What about Emily?" I knew the answer when I asked. Uncle Greg let out a sigh. "She said she couldn't assist with the bills when she visited once, immediately following the accident. She didn't want to ask her husband for money so soon after their honeymoon, for some reason. She is occupied with her stepchildren, her new family." That made me giggle. Emily is typical, always coming up with an excuse. Emily was too proud to approach her wealthy husband for assistance with our parents' medical expenditures, even though she had no trouble taking my fortune for her wedding. I sat in my office for a while after I hung up with Uncle Greg, gazing out the window at the skyline of the city. I didn't miss the irony. Now that my stock options had vested and I had more than enough money saved to pay for their medical expenses, I was truly in a position to assist them. Did I want to, though? I was unable to concentrate on anything else for the following few days. I jumped every time my phone buzzed, anticipating a call regarding their status. I couldn't stop picturing them in hospital beds, presumably wondering if I would ever arrive. Since they were my parents, I felt bad for even thinking about not helping. The years of favoritism, the stolen fortune, and the way they only contacted me now because they required something from me were all brought back to me though. Simply put, this was about money. Not about re-establishing contact or making amends. 3 days after Uncle Greg called, Emily texted me. "I am aware that you are performing well at work. Parents are in dire need of assistance. This is your opportunity to act morally." My opportunity to act morally? When she was using my inheritance to pay for her wedding, where was this moral compass? Where had she been all those years when she saw our parents brush off my accomplishments? My parents finally called themselves after a week of internal conflict. Although my mother's speech was weak and obviously influenced by painkillers, her deceptive methods remained same. As if the past 2 years of silence hadn't occurred, she began, "Sweetheart, we're in a really tough situation here. According to the specialists, the expenses might reach $200,000, not including rehabilitation. We acknowledge our shortcomings as parents, but..." I interrupted her. "No, you aren't, and you never will be. You haven't gotten in touch with me in 2 years, and the only reason is that you need money." My dad's voice said, "That's not fair." He was probably on speaker. "Your parents are us. Family supports family." That statement, "family helps family," set me off. Anger that had been bottled up for years came to the surface. "Family helps family." I said it again. When you used my inheritance to pay for Emily's wedding, where was that feeling? When you missed my college graduation, where were you? Where did you neglect every significant event in my life because you were too preoccupied with showing your admiration for Emily? After a brief period of silence, my mother began to cry. Those recognizable, cunning tears I had heard so many times when she wanted to make me feel bad. She said, "How can you be so cruel? The hospital is where we are. Your dad may require surgery. Will you truly desert us at this point?" I inhaled deeply before uttering the words I had been wishing to say for years. "Yes, in fact. Yes, I am. All my life you emotionally abandoned me. You just thought of me as Emily's shadow and your fallback option. Now that Emily is refusing to assist, you turn to me. No, I will no longer be your last option. Starting with, but we're family, my father said. No, I cut in. We're not. Since you determined that Emily was the only child deserving of your love, we have not been family. I'm finished. Never get in touch with me again. After hanging up, I blocked their numbers once more. I then texted Emily one last time, saying, they're also your parents. Try it yourself. The days that followed were extremely difficult. I would always have these moments where I would doubt my choice. Was I being too severe? Despite all, should I still assist them? But every time those thoughts surfaced, I was reminded of how they had treated me throughout my life and how they had only ever contacted me when they wanted something. Yesterday, Uncle Greg gave another call. He attempted to guilt-trip me by claiming that my parents required physical therapy and surgery since their health was deteriorating. He said they might lose everything and that they were discussing remortgaging their home. The problem is that I have no responsibility for their financial difficulties. They made their decisions. They decided to give Emily preference. They decided to squander the money I left them. They decided to allow their insurance to expire. They are currently dealing with the fallout from their decisions. Some may accuse me of being heartless. Perhaps I am. But I've been striving to be good enough and win their love my entire life, and I'm done. I am no longer the fallback option. When Emily refuses to take charge, I'm done being the one who has to make all the repairs. For the first time in my life, I'm choosing myself, even though I realize this makes me seem callous. My mental well-being is more important to me than their guilt trips. My financial stability is more important to me than their shoddy preparation. Reddit. I know I previously questioned whether I was the jerk for cutting them off, but I need to know if I'm the jerk for not helping them pay their medical costs. This one even seems unclear to my therapist. While I feel bad about it, I also think that this is just another instance of them only wanting me around when they need me. And believe me, the narrative doesn't end here. The situation is going to become considerably more intricate. Update 2. My life took yet another drastic change 3 days ago. I was enjoying a peaceful evening at home after a very demanding workday during which we had completed preparations for the opening of our new office. My doorbell rang at precisely 8:07 p.m. when I was studying some project paperwork, enjoying a glass of pricey red wine, a minor luxury I now permit myself, and some classical music playing softly in the background. I hadn't ordered anything and most of my friends normally text before coming over, so I wasn't expecting anyone. I froze, staring through the peephole. Emily was standing there looking like the affluent trophy wife she had become, complete with a fashionable gown, flawless makeup, and a $15,000 Hermes Birkin purse in her hand. I was aware of the irony. That bag alone could have paid for a sizable amount of our parents' medical expenses. I briefly thought about acting as though I wasn't home, but throughout the previous few weeks, I had undergone a transformation. I was no longer the person who squirmed around Emily. She had intimidated me for too long, and I had allowed her to win. No more. I opened the door with my cool, controlled and slightly dismissive corporate boardroom demeanor. Leaning against the doorframe, I remarked, "Well, if it isn't my dear sister. What brings you to my humble abode?" Without waiting for an invitation, she swept by me and entered my apartment. Emily's usual behavior. Her gaze swept across my living area, taking in the original artwork on the walls, the contemporary furnishings, and the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlook the city. I could picture her mentally listing everything, most likely contrasting it with her suburban McMansion. She said, "Nice place," in a tone that suggested the exact opposite. Very cozy. She used the word cozy with that special emphasis that affluent people give to something they think is beneath them. "Stop wasting your time, Emily. Why have you come here?" She turned to me, adjusting her scarf, an anxious habit from childhood. "Mom and Dad are deteriorating. Mom's physical treatment isn't covered by their payment plan, and Dad needs emergency surgery for internal bleeding they missed at first. Unless they can provide proof of payment, the hospital threatens to suspend treatment. They are discussing selling the house." I saw her knuckles whiten as she gripped her fancy purse more tightly. Emily in her classic form. She was clearly preparing for something. And that's my problem because... I arched an eyebrow, purposefully imitating her patronizing tone from our early years. "Because you can help them," she said, her immaculate exterior beginning to falter. "I am aware that your business went public. I checked the pricing of the stocks. I conducted research. You've got the cash." That made me giggle. The sound, which was perhaps rougher than I intended, reverberated off the walls of my flat. "Oh, you have been monitoring me? How intriguing. Before using my inheritance to pay for your wedding, did you do this much research? Or prior to your own refusal to assist them? In all this, where is your wealthy husband? Emily's face turned red, another vivid memory from my early years. Her dramatic outbursts, which always ended with our parents comforting her, were always preceded by that flush when we were little. That's different, she stammered as her poise continued to falter. I now have a new family. I have obligations. Consider stepchildren. We each have our own financial plans, James and I. When a family situation arises, I can't just throw money at it. Can't just what? With a strong voice, I interrupted her. Can't you simply assist your parents, who have given you everything? Who paid for your wedding with my inheritance? Who prioritizes you the most? Who didn't attend my college graduation to assist you with your apartment move? Those parents. She waved her hand dismissively and said, that's ancient history. But I saw that she stepped back. This is roughly right now. You're being selfish, and they need help. Her use of the word selfish was the last straw. A lifetime of repressed rage and bitterness abruptly solidified into a chilly, unambiguous goal. I went silently to my home office, picked up my laptop and a few papers off my desk, and then went back to the living room. Emily, would you like to discuss money? Let's have a conversation. I rotated the screen of my portfolio dashboard in her direction. Look at these figures. My stock options are these. I'll explain it to you in words you can comprehend. This is more valuable than James, your husband, will be in 3 years. That home of which you're so proud. If I wanted to, I could pay cash for it tomorrow. As she gazed at the numbers, her face turned white instead of crimson. I went on, bringing up papers such as my investment portfolio, my pay stubs, and the most recent offers I had gotten from rival businesses. But you're a tech worker. For the first time I could recall, she stumbled, you're just a programmer. Her voice was small. Emily, I'm now a senior development director. I was making something for myself while you and your wealthy husband were playing home. I also did it without treading on anyone else, unlike you. I clicked firmly to shut down my laptop. Without using any of my resources, I could assist mom and dad by covering their medical expenses. However, I won't. She murmured. You're being cruel. But I could see that she realized that her younger sister had outwitted her. No, it is terrible to stand by and do nothing while your sister is ignored her entire life. Without asking, cruel is stealing her inheritance. Cruel only shows up at her door when you're in need. I approached the door and pulled it open. Are we finished here? Don't return? Clutching her pricey purse like a shield, she stood there. She made one final attempt to say, you'll regret this, but her voice lacked the assurance it usually possessed. When they lose everything. My only regret is that I didn't cut you all off sooner. Emily, goodbye. I poured myself another glass of wine after she left, a $200 bottle I had been putting away for a special occasion, and this one felt like it, and then I went out to my balcony. In front of me, the city lights were a tapestry of freedom and opportunity. I felt totally free for the first time in my life. No more living in Emily's shadow, no more feeling guilty, no more looking for approval. My phone was inundated with notifications the following morning. Apparently, Emily had spent the night phoning every member of the family she could get through to tell them how I had changed, how prosperity had made me callous and uncaring, and how I was leaving the family when they needed me most. Uncle Greg wrote me a very long mail on karma and family responsibilities. In response, I shared a comprehensive folder with the family group chat. It included scanned copies of my inheritance documents, bank statements that revealed how my money was used for Emily's wedding, text messages from Emily stating that she would not assist with the medical bills despite her affluent lifestyle, and a breakdown of my current net worth that showed exactly how much I could contribute if I so desired. After that, the family conversation became very silent. Our cousin Angela was the only one to reply, "Holy, you actually did it, didn't you? In fact, you were successful on your own." I worked on my future plans over the course of the following few days. In another state, I accepted the promotion, which came with a bigger package of stock options and a substantial rise. The real estate agent believes my apartment will sell for a lot more than I'm asking for in this neighborhood, so I put it up for sale. I've already begun searching for real estate in my new city. This time, perhaps a penthouse. Emily sent me one last text last night, which said, "Mom's crying every night because of you." I commented, she had years to cry about how she treated me, and included a screenshot of my inheritance paperwork in my response. Her tears are no longer effective. After that, I blocked her number and all of my other family contacts. Closing the last chapter of a book I should have finished years ago was how it felt. You have been amazing during this journey, Reddit. Your encouragement made it clear to me that I wasn't alone in my feelings and that it's acceptable to put oneself above harmful family members. Your remarks served as a constant reminder of my decision-making process whenever I had second thoughts. Recently, I received a message questioning if achieving financial success was worth sacrificing my family. The truth is, though, that I didn't lose any. Folks who never treated me like family in the first place were folks I broke free from. My achievement just gave me the courage to refuse their treatment. It didn't change who I am. I want to express my gratitude to everyone who told me similar stories, gave me advice, or just confirmed how I felt. When I most needed strength, you gave it to me. I will begin looking for a home in my new city next week. A new life, a new career, and a new home. For the first time, I'm looking forward to the future without being constrained by obligations to my family. Aida. To some, perhaps. However, I've come to the crucial realization that sometimes being branded an asshole by toxic individuals is a sign that you're finally advocating for yourself. Reddit, thank you. I was able to discover my value and voice thanks to you.
Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you.